of the day, looking at the impact of COVID-19 on young people's examination results in 2020. Very pleased to welcome Kirsty Williams, MS, who is Minister for Education, Georgina Haroff, Deputy Director Curriculum, and Sinead Gallagher, Deputy Director of HE. Thank you very much for attending. We recognise this is an exceptionally busy time for all of you. Our intention as a committee is to provide constructive scrutiny and also to try and find out the support that's going to be available for children and young people in the days and weeks ahead. So can I ask the Minister then to make an opening statement, please?
Thank you very much, Chair. For our young people, just like everyone, the last few months have been and continue to be a stressful time. Many of us will know people who've been ill or have lost someone. I certainly do. And it's been a time of anguish for people right across the country. And I am sorry that for some of our young people, the results process has made that worse. That was not the intention of anyone. Not me, not Qualifications Wales, not teachers, not the WJEC. But it is right that I apologise directly and unreservedly to our young people. I am truly sorry. Recent months have thrown up unexpected, new and complex challenges. We've had to take decisions and design new ways of working at incredible pace, closing schools, cancelling exams and establishing a new results process. Qualifications Wales developed an alternative approach, consulted publicly on it to ensure that young people could receive their awards this year. Members of the committee will know that raising standards and providing targeted support and extending aspirations for students from disadvantaged backgrounds is what drives my reform programme for education in Wales. That is how we transform life chances, we improve national prosperity, and we become a better country. Working with Qualifications Wales and the WJEC, we sought an approach which provided fairness and balanced out differences in standards applied to judgments in schools. It brought together externally assessed prior attainment, teachers' and lecturers' estimates, and a moderation of those across all centres to maintain standards. But, as I announced yesterday, and given decisions elsewhere, the balance of fairness now lies with awarding centre assessment grades to students, despite the strengths of the system in Wales. I took the decision yesterday, ahead of the results being published this week, so that there is time for the necessary work to take place. And I'm pleased that the WJEC have confirmed that they are able to action this. For grades issued last week, all awards will also be made on the basis of teacher assessment. For those young people, around 17,000 grades, for whom the system produced the same or higher grades than those predicted by their teachers, the higher grades will stand. Maintaining standards, it's not new for 2020. It's a feature of awarding qualifications every year in Wales and indeed across the United Kingdom. However, it is clear that maintaining confidence in our qualifications, whilst being fair to students, required me to make this decision. These have been, as we've heard many times, exceptional circumstances. Next week, I will be making a further statement on an independent review of events following the cancellation of this year's exams. I believe it's right that we wait until after this week's results before we review and learn lessons from any further disruption. This also gives the committee an opportunity, if it wishes, to offer advice on particular issues it would like considered following today's meeting and ahead of next week. To conclude, Chair, I want to congratulate and thank all of our children and young people. They have shown incredible strength and resilience during this pandemic, and I hope now that they can step forward with confidence and ambition into their next stages, whether that be education, employment, or training. Diolch yn fawr.
Thank you, Minister, and thank you also for the offer that you made to the committee to feed into your review. We'll go now to questions from members, and the first questions are on the decision-making and communication around the system from Sian Gwenllian.
Diolch Cadeirydd ac pnawn da.
Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon, Minister. Could you have acted more swiftly, had you acted more swiftly than perhaps some of the young people who have not been able to access places at university could have accessed those places on the basis of their teacher assessment grades? In looking back, should you have taken some of these decisions more swiftly?
Thank you, Sian. At all stages of this process, we have tried to work in a timely fashion to protect the interest of Welsh learners, recognising that they are, especially at A-level, competing with students from across the United Kingdom. That's why we took the action we did on the day before results with regards to establishing the AS level floor and to instructing a broadening of the appeal process. Throughout this process, we have looked to ensure, wherever possible, we could enhance the opportunities to address any flaws in the system, whilst trying to maintain, firstly, the currency of Welsh qualifications, and certainly the ability of Welsh students to compete on a level playing field across the United Kingdom. When it became clear that confidence in the system and the balance of fairness in the system had shifted, we moved swiftly on Monday morning to make the adjustments to this week's qualifications and to signal the change to last week's qualifications.
Mi glywson ni yn eich datganiad chi.
We heard in your statement about decisions that had been taken elsewhere and that had driven your decision. So does that mean that you don't truly believe that the teacher assessments should have been used?
No, not at all. We make our own decisions here in Wales, but we have to be cognizant, do we not, of the fact that we share a qualification system with other parts of the United Kingdom, and we do not want Welsh students to be disadvantaged. We, over the weekend, continued to pursue options, which included moving to centre assessed grades if we felt that the balance of fairness had shifted. That was proactively worked on over the weekend, thus allowing me to make a decision on Monday morning when it was clear that that was now the fairest way to proceed.
Mae'n amlwg bod na chydig bach o newid.
It's clear that there has been some change in the way that you view these issues, but I do welcome the fact that you now do realise that Wales can do things in its own way. Do you accept that you are ultimately accountable for the Welsh qualifications regime, for better or for worse, but that you've only given 2 ministerial directives to the body between March and August until this most recent one, so 3 in total, but 2 between March and August, although you're responsible for the body?
Yes, that's right, Sian. The timeline is an open and transparent one. This process began on the 18th of March when I received advice from Qualifications Wales around the options for this summer's exam. Having taken the decision to cancel the exams because of the public health emergency, we issued a letter of direction outlining our approach and the principles by which Qualifications Wales were to deal with that situation. We continued to meet throughout this period with Qualifications Wales and take decisions to enhance their ability to do their job. So this isn't just about issuing directions to Qualifications Wales. So for instance, agreeing that Welsh Government data would be made available to enhance their processes, whether that be Key Stage 3 teacher assessment and national test data. We also made amendments to the accountability regime, ensuring that teachers felt under no pressure from accountability to influence their centre assessed grades. We then responded to the request by Qualifications Wales to approve their appeals, and continued throughout this period to ensure that the principles outlined in our first direction were upheld.
timeline.
Now, you mentioned the timeline, and I do think it's important that we as a committee do receive that information on paper, please. That would assist us, I think, in moving forward. And finally, from me, Chair, in this section, when exactly did you become aware that so many people would be downgraded under the system that was in place? On the 7th of July, you were asked in a committee session whether Welsh grades would be gravely affected by using the assessment system, and you said no, that there would be no problem. So when did you become aware that so many people would be affected, and when did it become apparent to you that you needed to carry out this U-turn?
Well, it became clear to me, and I have checked the record from the last time I was at committee. The question was asked in relation to the speculation in newspapers of a significant amount of grade inflation and how grade inflation would be tackled. And I explained to the committee that the standardisation process was in place to deal with that situation. I became aware of the numbers involved on Monday of last week.
Thank you. Dawn Bowden.
A bit late.
Thank you, Chair. And can I just say to you, Minister, thank you for everything that you have done through this pandemic. It's been probably the most difficult thing that any minister has had to do, and you making decisions at a time, you know, when hundreds of people were dying, including people that were involved in the education system as well. And I think that needs to be recognised. Can I just ask you about when you were first alerted to the fact that England was about to change its system? Had you been in discussion with Gavin Williamson? And I asked that because I'm interested to know if and how that impacted either directly or indirectly on your decision.
Well, thank you, Dawn, first of all, for the recognition that everybody involved in the education system, whether that be in our schools, Qualifications Wales or WJEC, or indeed in the education department here in Welsh Government, have been undertaking all of this work during that pandemic. And I'm grateful for your recognition of that. Throughout this process, I have been in regular contact with all three other education ministers in the United Kingdom through a regular series of quadrilateral phone calls. At the beginning of the pandemic, the Westminster government also created a ministerial implementation groups at which I joined from time to time if there were education issues on the agenda. And at least one of those included looking at the exam process. You'll be aware that I wrote on 2 occasions to Gavin Williamson around the date of the exam day, because there was a push in England for the exams day to be brought forward, and we wrote to urge the Westminster Minister to keep exam dates the same, and we did that because we felt we needed to create that time for this process to be done properly, and any curtailing of the usual timing would be detrimental. And I'm glad that you know, the traditional days became available. I spoke to Gavin Williamson formally, I believe, on Tuesday of last week to discuss the impact of the decision that had been taken in Scotland on the Tuesday. So as I said, the data became available to us on the Monday. I could hear Sian's gasp. I should say, in normal circumstances, as Welsh ministers, we become aware of the data of results at the same time the centres become available of the dates of the results. That is not unusual. That's part of the safeguards in the system to stop political interference in the examination system. So we saw the data, some of the data on the Monday. I spoke to Gavin Williamson last on the Tuesday to discuss the impact of the Scottish decision. And I spoke to him again informally on Saturday. I had no, I certainly received, and I'm not sure my officials received, any formal notification of the decision to change in England. They were clearly grappling with the same issues we were. I gave a direction following discussions on the Monday, on the Saturday, sorry, to prepare two scenarios, how we potentially could build safeguards into the GCSE system as a result of our learning when we saw the AS level results, because many of the GCSEs were going to be standardised on the same model, and to prepare, if necessary, to go to centre assessed grades, depending on, as I said, confidence in the system and the ability to protect the Welsh learners' interests.
Thank you for that. And can I just ask, because in answer to your to Sian Gwenllian, you talked about when it became clear that confidence in the system had shifted, and you said the balance of fairness had already shifted. So presumably those two things happened around the same time when you started to see the data, when you saw the data. You know, and I'm not putting words into your mouth, but I'm working on the assumption that meant you saw the data and you thought, oh, this wasn't what we wanted. This wasn't what we had expected, and so you moved to act in the light of that information. Can I ask how many people have been flagging with you as minister their concerns that this could have been the outcome of the process that we were following in Wales, the assessment process? How many people, from stakeholders, politicians, councillors, WLGA, schools, heads, you name it, anybody who had an interest, how many of those have been flagging with you their concern that this could have been the outcome?
Okay, so I think that there was an understanding, and indeed, I would argue a desire for the introduction of a standardisation process. I think all stakeholders and ASCL themselves have said that a standardisation process was necessary, because it is absolutely impossible for teachers in all the centres that we have to arrive at those same judgments and use exactly the same parameters. So I think that there was agreement, because of the limitations of using teacher assessment on their own, that there should be a standardisation process. And indeed, I answered questions in committee to that effect, because people were concerned about potential bias and potential disparity in some schools perhaps being generous, other schools perhaps being very, very strict. And also we know from research that potentially teacher assessment on its own potentially can work against some groups of students. We did receive correspondence from some head teachers who were worried about whether there was enough flexibility in the system to recognise rapidly improving schools. So whether there had been a tremendous difference in the performance of the schools, whether that would adequately be represented. And that was covered off in a specific element of the appeal where a school could provide evidence to the WJC of that being the case. With regards to the WLGA, there was a difference of views whenever on a few occasions where the issue of exams came up. There was one representative of the WLGA who thought teacher assessment on its own was the right approach. But I met formally at the request of the WLGA with Qualifications Wales and with the WJEC with the education portfolio holders of the local authorities and members of ADU, and no significant issues were raised at that meeting that standardisation was not appropriate.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dawn. Laura? Can you unmute, please?
Unmuted. Thanks, Chair. I welcome your decision yesterday, Minister, so thank you for that. It was the right decision, and I'm sure a hard one, but it was the right one. I just want to, following on from the questions already asked just now, I just wanted to know how difficult you found it to work as a Four Nations. Obviously, it's paramount that we did work as Four Nations, considering the amount of traffic that goes across our borders to the different universities. I just wanted to know what your relationships were like and how that worked before Scotland made their announcement and afterwards. And also, I mean, obviously, when Scotland made their announcement, it must have sent off alarm bells for you. And you said you had conversations with Gavin. I'm just wondering if you could elaborate on those a little bit. And when was it exactly that you decided that centre assessed grades were the right decision? And also, I wanted to ask, what discussions and what assurances did you seek from the WJEC and Qualifications Wales? From my understanding, it seems that you didn't contact them during this period when you made your decision. I'm just wondering if you actually did, or who did you speak to, who did you consult on that? Because obviously it's major decision. They're the ones that came up with the algorithm that you strongly said was a good idea. So just wondering why the shift, and did you just sort of bring them into that process for your decision making? Thank you.
So there are three questions there, really.
Relations between myself and the other parts of the United Kingdom are very good and very cordial, and I have got no complaints with that whatsoever. It is important that we have a shared approach to this process because of one, ensuring that we have a currency for our qualifications and portability for Welsh students' qualifications. And that's why the regulators from Four Nations had worked closely together to arrive at broadly similar approaches to establishing awards this year. Although in Wales, of course, ours was different because we were able to feed into our system a greater level of prior attainment because of our AS system and because of some of our GCSEs are unitised. So ours was broadly similar to that of Northern Ireland, but the approach was one that was agreed between Four Nations, and the fact that all Four Nations have found difficulties demonstrates, that, as I said, we've been grappling with similar issues. Laura says that I was not, I think Laura was asking whether I was in touch with Qualifications Wales and WJEC throughout this period. So as I said, I formally met on the 10th of August with Qualifications Wales to discuss arrangements for the results, given what had happened in Scotland at the end of the previous week, and to seek assurances around the levels of qualifications involved, and to ask for further assurances and to seek further assurances, in particular about the impact on FSM learners. We then met again on the 12th of August. There was, I'm just seeing here, I think there was 3 meetings on the 12th of August. There were then a series of meetings on the 14th of August, the 15th of August, and the 16th of August, as well then as meetings. So throughout this period, we have been working with the WJEC and Qualifications Wales to understand the impact of the process, to ascertain what we needed to do to ameliorate some of the imperfections in that process, and how we could address concerns. So throughout this process, we've been keeping in a very close touch indeed, on a daily, sometimes a day, multiple basis a day. I made the decision to move to centre assessed grades on Monday morning.
So, Minister, do you not think that following Scotland that you could have possibly made a decision quicker to get to that conclusion?
I think what's important, Laura, is to recognise that, first of all, whilst there are similarities in the system, our system was different. And I felt it was important, because of our ability to incorporate prior achievement, especially into our A levels, that our system was a strong one. When it became clear on Monday evening, as I said, that the standardisation process had had a big impact, then we sought reassurances about the equity of that, in particular for FSM learners, and to take steps to protect Welsh interests, such as the AS level floor, as well as broadening the appeals, because we recognise that there could be scenarios where the results just seemed off and there were outliers, and we needed an appeals process to capture those outliers. With regards to the GCSEs, we explored over the course of the weekend a number of options that could be employed, again, to address that, to provide assurance. So in the case of how we'd provided assurance around an AS floor, whether we could do that the same with the unitised examinations, and whether there was more that we could do with regards to a centre's past performance to ameliorate the effects on individual learners. But it became clear to me on Monday that any system that relied on standardisation would no longer enjoy public confidence. And therefore it was impossible to proceed with the GCSEs as originally planned, even with some additional amelioration that had been agreed over the weekend, and because, of course, we didn't want to disadvantage Welsh learners.
Thank you, Minister.
Okay, thank you. Susie.
Thank you. And yes, thank you from me as well, Minister. This has been a very difficult time for everybody. I just want to take you back to the timeline a little bit, and why there was this level of confidence in the algorithm. It's an element of confidence I expressed myself precisely because we had the AS level being able to be fed into it. One of the things that's I think has been a problem is that we haven't got any information about what previous disconnects there have been between teachers' assessment or grade assessment and the actual results in given years. So we don't even know if this 13 to 14% inflation was normal. I think that might be useful information to gather from now on. Having said all that, though, Sianna's mentioned our meeting on July the 7th when you expressed confidence in the system. By the 3rd of August, however, Qualifications Wales was already in a position to say that 35% of students were going to be getting fewer or lower grades than the teachers' assessments, and a considerable number of those were going to be down more than 1 grade. Now, the 3rd of August is a week before the 10th of August, and I'm wondering at what point Qualifications Wales made their concerns known to you, that 35% of these grades were off target, knowing that a certain number of them should be getting at least their AS level grade. And I make that comment not because it was introduced as a floor later on, but because WJEC told us earlier that most students, and I mean a considerable most, will either get their AS mark or higher by the time they get to their full A level. By August the 3rd, I would have expected you to be worried.
I was not informed of that data on August the 3rd. I believe that that was not made available to me. I was informed of the data and the scale of the effect of the standardisation process on the 10th of August.
All right, well, thank you for that. Obviously, between that information I've just given you and now, we've moved from a figure of 35% to 42%. On the 10th of August, what were you told about where we were on the number of grades that were going to be depressed?
42%. That's the figure. That's the figure I was given on the 10th.
Oh, right. Okay. So it wasn't just before we had the results then. Okay. Nothing had moved in that period.
No. So I was given those results on the 10th of August. We were concerned. We were particularly concerned about whether there was a disproportionate effect on FSM. That data was asked for. That data was supplied from the WJEC to Qualifications Wales the following evening, and that was given then to me from Qualifications Wales the following morning. So I became aware of additional data on the Wednesday morning, so that's when I became aware.
No, I mean that's very helpful. And at what point did you know that we were talking about 4,000 young people possibly being affected by not having that AS floor, which obviously I welcome that being introduced? Because I'm just curious about why it wasn't sort of in the algorithm in the first place.
So it wasn't in the algorithm in the first place. We weren't aware of the numbers involved that would be caught by that floor. We were looking to seek to ameliorate and to provide additional assurance. So in making that decision, it seemed to me a way in which we could provide a greater level of assurance, especially when the ground was shifting in other parts of the United Kingdom. So in making that decision, we did not know how many students would be affected. That data was made available after the decision.
Okay, thank you. Just finally from me then, we heard from Qualifications earlier on that the way that they communicated with Welsh Government was through, I think it's called a sponsorship body meetings, is it? Where they said that they were briefing your officials at least weekly and then more often, obviously, as we get nearer to the exam date, which I think you've just confirmed. Were you at all, I'm not saying that you should have been, but were you at all these meetings or was it mainly officials?
Yeah, it was officials. I can give you a timeline of the meetings that I personally had with Qualifications Wales, but that is handled by officials.
No, that's fine. Thank you.
Laura? Can you unmute, please?
Sorry, it's been 13 years since I've been on committee. I just wanted to ask quickly just something on algorithms. Sorry, I did want to ask this to WJC Minister, but just wanted to, you can see that when coming to the 10-year period for the history of the school, which a lot of it was based on, I just wondering why it went to 10 years from 3 years, when it seems to sort of penalise schools that are on the way up. So if your school has been doing really badly, then they have a change of head or change of school and everything's going up. It's not taken into account, and the results reflected that came out. Whereas it was based on a whole history of a school, and in 10 years, a lot can happen in a school. So just wondering why was that decision made? And for me, that's very discriminatory on in a lot of ways. And I was just wondering how you could be so positive towards an algorithm that produces that. Thank you.
The individual mechanisms of the algorithm was a matter for the WJC overseen by Qualifications Wales. My involvement in the process was the letter of direction setting out the principles that we wanted the system to achieve.
Yeah, I get that, Minister, but you came out all guns blazing saying it was the best thing, it's more robust than the rest of the UK and things like that. Just if you must have looked into detail on what it was producing, and since what the results have produced, and picked up what we've picked up with things like this, and seen that it's not perfect. And granted, we're in unprecedented times and nothing is going to be perfect, but that's quite significant and had a quite significant output.
So the model was available on the WJEC website, and I think it's important to recognise that in developing the model, the WJEC did that in consultation with the teachers groups and others. This is not been something that has been cooked up either behind closed doors in the WJEC or between myself, the WJEC and Quals Wales. So there was concern expressed about how rapidly improving schools that had, as you said, quite understandably, perhaps in the last year, had changed their head teacher, or perhaps maybe other changes within the management of that school, how that could be reflected. And I was satisfied that Qualifications Wales had made arrangements in their appeal system for that scenario to be taken into consideration.
Okay, thank you. We need to move on now to talk about some of the consequences of the decision that was taken yesterday. So I've got Hefin first.
I think first, Minister, I'd like to acknowledge your apology, which I think showed a great deal of humility and is an example to your colleagues in government. And I think it's worth acknowledging that at this point as we move on to look to the next steps. Thinking about the next steps, how are you going to manage the unintended consequences of grade inflation?
Well, of course, that was one of the overarching principles that we wanted to achieve as a result of this examination was fairness. Fairness, obviously, to this cohort, giving them confidence in their results. It's no child's fault that they could not sit their exams this year. It was absolutely imperative that they should be able to move on and progress by having grades awarded to them. And I believe that making sure that we had a robust system that was broadly in line with where we were previously, that would give confidence to the to the system. And indeed, in much of the consultation responses to Qualifications Wales, that principle of fairness to this class, but also to fairness to classes that have gone before and classes that will come, that broad alignment with where we had previously been was important. But as I said, it became clear when confidence in the system has shifted away from a standardisation model, it was the balance of fairness then shifted to moving to the centre assessed grades. I think it is really important to recognise in the A-levels, the vast majority of A-level grades will have been either at centre assessed grades or will have been within one grade of that. So actually that's 95% of those results which are either the same as their centre assessed grade or broadly one grade either side. Now I appreciate from an individual's perspective that one grade will make all the difference in terms of the ability to get into a university, but I think it does demonstrate the limitations then on grade inflation. But undoubtedly the decision today, will play in to perhaps next year's exams. But I think, from listening to people, in recent days, the acceptance was this was an exceptional year, and therefore on the balance of fairness, to ensure fairness, then we had to recognise that grade inflation would be part of this exceptional year.
Okay, and given that there's this exceptional year, you don't feel that will therefore undermine confidence in the grading system?
I think it's important to recognise, as you will all understand, that, as I said, standards and maintaining standards is not new to this process in 2020. This is a process that is a familiar part of our examination. And I have seen commentary about whether, the situation we find ourselves in this summer kind of breaks apart, some of the constructs that we have around our qualification system. And I'm sure people will want to debate that as part of maybe a longer term reform of qualifications. And I welcome that debate, because I think, all of us would acknowledge that even in the traditional exam system, there are some issues about whether people regard that as fair and whether that is as good as it should be. I think what's really important for me, Hefin, is that we have this rapid review now to learn the lessons of what happened during this process, not lessons in Wales, but also lessons in other parts of the United Kingdom. We're already in touch, officials are already in touch with Professor Mark Priestley, who was carrying out the review for the Scottish Government, to see what we can learn from their approach to reviewing the situation that they find themselves in. Because we need to realise, although it is my absolute determination that students should sit their exams next year, you know, we have to plan for the eventuality, you know, not for the eventuality, but plan for a scenario where if there's a public health emergency, that might impact on next year.
So,
and we have to have a better understanding to make sure we avoid the situation we found ourselves in this year. If, and I really, really, really hope it does not happen, we can't do exams next year, which I want to make absolutely clear is my intention to do the exams.
Yeah, and I'd like to come to that at the end, but just regarding this kind of idea that you just put forward of building back better, kind of, you know, how do we learn better from the from what's happened? Do you think now we can move to giving more confidence in teachers to moderate, as perhaps families of schools, clusters of schools locally, to moderate more closer to the school, so that although there may be a standardized system of moderation, do you think we could move to something of devolved moderation practices and perhaps give qualifications Wales more of a quality assurance role, and WJEC more of a quality assurance role than having a direct say in moderation?
Well, I think, Heaven, as I said, there's been some very thoughtful commentary on not just this system, but you know, our traditional exam system, and whether what are the challenges and the limitations around that. You'll be aware that Qualifications Wales is already carrying out a series of consultations about the future of qualifications as they align to our new curriculum reforms. And so there is an opportunity as part of that process. You know, the first part of the consultation has been completed, and there is a great deal of confidence in the GCSE brand and the A-level brand. But, you know, there is room, I think, in that space to discuss the limitations in the current examination, system.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Dawn, then briefly, please.
Thanks, Lynn. Can I just ask you whether you feel that the change in policy is now going to more positively impact on the attainment gap based on deprivation and other equality characteristics?
So now that we've made the decision to move to centre assessed grades, Qualifications Wales is undertaking a new equality impact under that new system. So you'll be aware that they had done work previously on the grades as was published, and I understand that work will be completed this week to understand the impact of moving to this system on equalities, and they intend to publish that, I believe, on Thursday.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Minister, can I ask then about the transition for learners now, because of what was announced yesterday? We've heard universities talking about some of the challenges that they're going to face. Some young people would have been rejected for places last week based on their results. What are you doing to take this forward with universities, especially given obviously some of them are out without control in England?
Yes, of course. I think the first thing to say, Chair, if you don't mind, is that data shows that over the last 5 years, students placed with their first choice was around 76%. So on a normal year, you would expect 76% of students to be placed with their first choice university. Prior to yesterday's announcement, that was standing at 77%. So actually, in terms of ability to move to your first choice university, figures are comparable. But clearly, the decision yesterday will have an impact. Officials are in discussion with Universities Wales, and I've been very pleased to receive the assurances for universities here in Wales that they will do everything that they can to assist students if they have not been able to secure a place to date. I myself spoke to Colin Reardon this morning, the Vice Chancellor of Cardiff, to understand some of the challenges in that particular university. Senedd can give further details, but we're in close touch with Universities UK and UCAS to make this process as smooth as possible, and to ensure that the new grades are communicated as quickly as possible into UCAS and into our universities. And we will continue to have a discussion in the universities that we have a relationship with here in Wales to understand what Welsh Government can do to assist them in being as flexible as possible. But I don't know if Sinead would like to give some further details.
Sinead?
Yep, just to say that alongside UCAS, we're advising students to get in touch with their university of choice if the change in grades means that they are able to, if they've met the condition of their firm or insurance choice. This is a moving feast, and universities will be trying to support students as much as they possibly can. In some cases, that they might be offering alternative courses or deferrals of places, but we are assured, particularly with the universities in Wales, that they are doing everything they possibly can at the moment to support students.
Thank you. Can I just ask, is it your understanding then that students who had an offer off the university, that's like a contract, so they are entitled to that place? Is that your understanding of the situation?
That's my broad understanding, but of course institutions will have their own legal advice on this, and there may be kind of complexities, but yeah, that's the broad understanding.
Okay. Thank you. Susie?
Yes, thank you. I wonder, perhaps this is one for Ms Gallagher as well, is because of COVID, I mean, it's not so long ago we were talking about universities being very worried about the number of students that you were going to get, and that even those who accepted their offer may be asking, can they defer a year so that their university experience might be different. It may be a bit early to say yet, but have we got any indication about how many accepted offers have already applied to defer, which of course will create space for some of the students who are now getting the opportunity to possibly backfill those spaces, and if so, what are your early thoughts on how we then make this fair for next year's cohorts applying to universities, because there will be fewer places available then because of so many deferred places going into next year. I mean, it may be that this year isn't as bad as we think, but we are pushing the problem into next year instead.
So, sorry, Susie, if I can
yes,
start.
of course. Sorry, Minister.
No, not at all. So I met with UCAS on results day to discuss patterns of entry. Certainly at that point, there was no, and you would expect those group of students who'd received their grades that morning, who had secured a place, they would then be making those decisions to defer, and deferrals did not seem out of kilter with the usual practice. So certainly as of Thursday, deferrals by students who could have taken up a place but have decided they want to take the year out for whatever reason they may be, was running at the usual expected rate, was no greater or smaller than that. So as I said, we're working as closely as we can with our universities who want to be flexible and who want to be able to offer places if at all possible, and we'll continue to work with them and the Funding Council to understand what we can do to assist them in their flexibility.
Can I just come in with a supplementary then? Because
very quickly.
Yes, I mean, recently, Minister, you've offered issued direction to HEFCO to do what they can to stabilise the system with the backing of some additional finance. I just trying to get a sense of actually what's practical for Welsh students who've been turned down by English universities on the basis of previous grades in those high status, high demand courses like medicine and nursing and vet school and all the rest of it, where literally there just may not be space.
Well, my understanding is that, and Senedd will forgive me, because as you can imagine, it's a fast-moving situation as the day goes on. So my understanding is that Aberystwyth University have made a commitment to take students. I don't know whether there are any exceptions, a course exception to that general principle, and I'm very grateful to Aberystwyth University as well as the University of South Wales that have made a similar promise. We are, as I said, we're aware that there may be some pressure in medicine in particular and potentially on nursing. I spoke to Colin Reardon to understand the nature of that pressure this morning, and the Health Minister has also spoken to Colin Reardon this morning, and he has subsequently sent over some data, because when I first spoke to him this morning he didn't have the data, but he has subsequently sent that over to the Funding Council, and we'll continue to work with the Funding Council to understand what the constraints are, and in particular whether there's something that we can do as a government to to assist with that. So we're keeping that situation under review, and clearly it is a developing situation, and we need to see how the next couple of days pans out and what we can do to assist.
Thanks, Minister. Can I just ask you then, in terms of COVID and the need for universities to be COVID secure, have the discussions ranged on that as well? Because obviously, you know, it's not a good year for there to be too many students, is there? I mean, are you confident that they're fully taking that into account?
Yes, I am. The universities want to play their part in safely managing a return to higher education, and I know that there isn't a single Vice-Chancellor that would want to jeopardise that in any way. They certainly would not want to be jeopardising students' health by not following advice and guidance of Welsh Government. It is too important to them, their staff and their students to do that.
Thank you. Sian, very briefly then, please.
Diolch.
Thank you. I don't think that we've still been explained in terms of your decision not to use teacher assessment last Thursday. Was that the right decision or the wrong decision?
I believe at the time it was the right decision. As the situation changed, as public confidence in the system changed, as other people changed, it was right that we made the changes that we did.
So you're still saying that the system itself was the right one. So why would you need an appeals system that's constantly changing? The criteria for that is constantly changing too. How can you continue to say that the system is the right one?
Sian, I think the important thing to recognise is that the system wasn't perfect. Whichever system we'd use, you know, some would argue, and people do argue, that the examination system is not perfect and the standardisation that is involved in examinations is not perfect. We believed that we had a fair system, but clearly as the results were published, and I think it's important to understand that we're not party to those results, because, you know, that's part of the independent process. But as the results began to unfold, it did become clear that there were some situations that seemed, you know, to have fallen foul of the system. I believe it was the best system. It was an imperfect system, and then we tried to.
I'm not going to bring you back in, Sian, because there's no time.
Well, and we were trying.
No. I'm not doing it.
This is an important point on the
Sian, I made it very
education.
clear that everybody was to have a fair amount of time today. Kirsty, have you finished?
As I said, Chair. As I said, Chair, you know, we throughout this process we're looking to protect the interest of Welsh learners. Was the system perfect? As individual results came out, it clearly had limitations, and we were trying to ensure that those affected by the limitations of the system were treated fairly and were given a chance. When it became clear that the balance of fairness had shifted and confidence in the system had shifted ahead of these GCSE results, and that a standardised process was undermining the confidence in the system, and our students potentially were going to be put at a disadvantage because of changes, then we acted upon that. And as I said at the beginning, I'm really very truly sorry about the situation that students have found ourselves in, but we have taken the steps that we feel were in the best interest of individuals and the system as a whole, and have acted accordingly.
Thank you. Hefin David.
Thank you, Chair. With regard the next steps in the year ahead, you've outlined both the idea of an inquiry and what happens next. What is your plan A, B, and C for the next academic year?
Clearly, the first challenge, Hefin, is to get all of our children back to school. and I know that individual teachers, institutions and local authorities are working very hard to make that happen. Individual schools will have been notified of modifications to next year's specs. That varies from subject to subject, so teachers are now in possession of the knowledge of how the specs for next year's examinations will change. One of the focuses of our multi-million-pound investment into schools is to prioritise the learning of those students that are sitting public examinations. And in terms of the examination series, we expect to run the usual November series, the usual January series, and then the full series next summer with modifications as have been published by the WJEC. But clearly we have to prepare for further disruption to the examination system. Clearly what has happened this time needs to be avoided at all costs, and therefore we will need the review to give recommendations of how we can ensure that should we not be in a position to proceed with examinations, we have a system that enjoys public and professional confidence.
Kevin?
Yeah, just with regard to the consequences of AS, you won't have the same options next year with AS either. So with all that in mind, are you confident you will be prepared for a further lockdown? And how are you specifically going to prepare for that?
Well, first of all, we are hoping at all costs that we can avoid a national lockdown. But even if we have a local lockdown, we need all schools to be prepared of how they can provide a continuation of learning in those circumstances. Previously, we had to do that in a bit of a rush because schools closed so quickly, but schools have had an opportunity to prepare those plans. But I think if this review is to be meaningful, I have to keep an open mind. I can't say today this is exactly how the examination system is going to operate, because that would mean that my commitment to a review was a sham, and it's not a sham. As I said, clearly we need to learn the lessons from what has happened this summer, and lessons that will have to be learned in Northern Ireland, Scotland and England too. And therefore, at this stage, we can't give an absolute guarantee that if those exams are cancelled, and my goodness me, haven't we all learnt that we need to, if at all possible, ensure that those exams do happen, that there is a system to deal with that, as I said, enjoys public and professional confidence. But I don't want to prejudge anything that an independent review will tell me about how we need to do that. Otherwise, the commitment is a sham, isn't it? If I've got preconceived ideas, this is a learning opportunity for me, for Qualifications Wales, the WJEC, the system as a whole, and we need to work together to do it better for students next time.
Okay, thank you. Minister, can I ask you in relation to appeals, which we have discussed with the previous panels, can you confirm that young people will only be able to appeal against the CAG in respect of any errors in the process and not against the judgment that has been reached by the school?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, lovely. Thank you very much. Okay, well, we have then come to the end of our time. We would be grateful if you would keep us updated on the review that you've described. We appreciate your commitment to seek the views of the committee in that. Can I thank you and your officials for your attendance today. As usual, you will receive a transcript to check for accuracy following the meeting, but thank you very much for your time. Diolch yn fawr.
Thank you.